Welcome to Storytales. Please like this video and subscribe to Storytales. I hope you enjoy the story. Let's begin.
John Holt's truck rumbled to a stop in the driveway of his suburban Texas home 3 hours earlier than usual. The afternoon sun beat down on his broad shoulders as he stepped out, squinting at the two-story house he'd purchased 5 years ago. A house that had never felt like a home. That he loosened his tie and grabbed his briefcase from the passenger seat. The Henderson project had wrapped up ahead of schedule, a rarity in the construction business, and he decided to surprise Delilah by coming home early. Maybe they could salvage what little remained of their marriage with dinner at that new steakhouse downtown. His boots crunched on the gravel pathway as he approached the front door. The neighbor across the street waved, and John nodded in acknowledgement. He maintained appearances well. No one in the neighborhood suspected the Cold War raging behind the Holt's pristine white walls. John inserted his key into the lock and turned it quietly. He stepped inside, immediately noticing Delilah's expensive perfume hanging in the air, the one she only wore when she wanted something from him. His jaw tightened. He set his briefcase down by the door and moved through the entryway, his footsteps muffled by the plush carpet he'd paid a fortune for because Delilah had insisted it was essential for the home's aesthetic. Voices drifted from the living room, Delilah's syrupy laugh and Aubrey's higher-pitched one. John paused just outside the doorway, his body tensing as he caught snippets of their conversation. "Mom, you should just go stay with Xavier. He's way better than Dad." Aubrey's voice was gleeful, conspiratorial. John's hand curled into a fist at his side. Xavier, Delilah's ex-husband. The man she'd been with before John had entered the picture. The man she'd apparently never stopped seeing. Delilah chuckled. "Oh, baby, you know it. John is just a provider. Xavier is exciting." The words hit John like ice water. He'd suspected for months that Delilah was cheating, but hearing the confirmation spoken so casually, so dismissively, made his blood run cold. He wasn't a man who raised his voice or threw things when angry. His anger ran deeper, colder. "And don't worry, I'll keep Jordan entertained while you're gone," Aubrey added with a smirk evident in her tone. John stepped into the doorway, his face deliberately blank despite the rage coursing through him. "Excuse me?" Both women's heads snapped toward him. Aubrey, sprawled across the leather couch John had bought last Christmas, widened her eyes momentarily before a calculated smile spread across her face. Delilah sat in the armchair opposite, her blonde hair perfectly styled, wearing the red dress John had bought her for their anniversary. A Louis Vuitton suitcase stood by her feet. Delilah didn't even have a decency to look surprised or guilty. She merely glanced up, her perfectly made-up face showing mild annoyance at the interruption. "John, I'm going to live with Xavier for 30 days. I want to see if we still have something. No apology, no shame, not even a hint of remorse for the betrayal she'd just admitted to. Just a simple statement of fact, as if she were announcing she was going to the store for milk." Aubrey snorted, her eyes gleaming with malice. "Dad, just be a good little ATM like always." John took in the scene before him. The wife he'd loved and provided for over the last decade, planning to leave him for another man. The stepdaughter he'd raised as his own since she was 9, treating him like garbage. The luxury items surrounding them that he'd worked 60-hour weeks to afford. In that moment, something inside John Holt shifted. The last thread of attachment he'd felt toward these two women snapped cleanly, leaving nothing but cold calculation in its place. "All right," he said simply. Delilah blinked, clearly thrown by his calm response. "All right, that's it. What do you want me to say, Delilah?" John asked, his voice steady. "I don't know. Something. Aren't you going to try to stop me?" She looked almost disappointed by his lack of reaction. "Would it make a difference if I did?" Aubrey stood up, her tight jeans and crop top revealing more skin than they covered. "God, Dad, you're so pathetic. Mom's telling you she's running off with her ex, and you just stand there?" John met his stepdaughter's gaze, his eyes cold. "Sit down, Aubrey." Something in his tone made her comply, though she rolled her eyes dramatically as she did. John turned back to Delilah. "How long have you been seeing him?" Delilah shrugged, examining her manicured nails. "On and off for about a year. It got serious these last few months." "A year?" While John had been working his ass off, expanding his construction company, Delilah had been warming her ex-husband's bed. While John had been buying her jewelry and designer clothes, she'd been laughing behind his back.
I see.
John nodded slowly. And the money? Have you been giving him money? A flash of guilt crossed Delilah's face, the first genuine emotion she'd shown.
I needed to help him get back on his feet.
With my money.
Our money,
Delilah corrected sharply.
I'm entitled to half of everything, John. That's the law.
John almost smiled at that. Delilah had never bothered to learn about his business arrangements or how he'd structured their finances.
She'd been too busy spending to care where it all came from.
When are you leaving? He asked. Now, Delilah replied, standing up and smoothing her dress.
Xavier's waiting for me.
Of course he was. John wondered if the leech had ever worked a day in his life.
Fine.
John stepped aside, clearing the path to the door. Delilah hesitated, clearly thrown by John's lack of resistance.
That's really it? You're not going to fight for me?
John met her eyes.
Why would I fight for someone who doesn't want to be here?
Because you love me, Delilah said, as if stating an obvious fact.
Did I?
John asked quietly. Delilah's confidence faltered for the first time.
What's that supposed to mean? It means I'm done, Delilah. Go to Xavier. See if he can give you what you want.
Aubrey stood up again, hands on her hips.
Mom, don't listen to him. He's just trying to manipulate you.
He'll be begging you to come back within a week. John looked at his stepdaughter, this young woman he'd put through private school, whose first car he'd bought, whose college tuition he was paying, and felt nothing but contempt.
Aubrey, I suggest you make other arrangements as well.
Aubrey laughed.
What? You can't kick me out.
This is my home, too.
Actually, it's my home.
Your name isn't on the deed, and you're an adult now. I have no legal obligation to house you.
Mom.
Aubrey turned to Delilah, outrage written across her face. Delilah waved a dismissive hand.
He doesn't mean it, sweetie. He's just upset. You know how he gets. She turned to John. Aubrey stays here.
That's non-negotiable.
John shrugged. Have it your way.
For now. Delilah grabbed the handle of her suitcase. I'll call you tomorrow, baby, she said to Aubrey. Then to John, I'll be in touch about money. I'm sure you will, John replied. Delilah wheeled her suitcase to the door. She paused, perhaps waiting for John to make one last plea, but he remained silent. With a huff, she walked out, letting the door slam behind her. Owen watched through the window as she loaded her suitcase into her BMW, the one he'd bought her for her last birthday, and drove away without a backward glance. Aubrey flopped back onto the couch.
Well, that was dramatic. Don't worry, Dad.
She'll be back when she realizes Xavier is broke. John turned slowly to face his stepdaughter.
Do you really think I'm that stupid, Aubrey?
Her smirk faltered.
What? Do you think I didn't know what was going on?
I didn't see how both of you have been using me.
Aubrey sat up straighter. I don't know what you're talking about.
I heard everything you said before I walked in.
You think I'm an ATM?
A provider and nothing more? John's voice remained calm, but his eyes were hard.
Perhaps it's time I stopped providing.
Fear flickered across Aubrey's face.
You wouldn't.
Would not.
John checked his watch. I have some work to do. I suggest you think carefully about your position in this house.
He turned and walked away, leaving Aubrey staring after him in confusion. For the first time in years, John felt a sense of clarity. They'd made their bed, and now they would lie in it. John closed the door to his home office and sat down at his desk. The solid oak surface was clear except for his laptop and a framed photo of him and Delilah on their wedding day. He picked up the photo, studying the smile on his younger self's face. He'd been so hopeful then, so in love with the beautiful, vivacious woman at his side. What a fool, he muttered, opening his desk drawer and dropping the frame inside. Face down, he opened his laptop and logged into their joint bank account. The balance showed $127,843.21, a substantial sum that represented years of hard work. John pulled up the transaction history and scrolled through the entries, his suspicions confirmed with each line. Regular withdrawals to an account he didn't recognize. Designer shopping sprees. Expensive restaurants where he'd never dined. And the most damning, multiple transfers to Xavier Marks with memos like rent help and car repair. John leaned back in his chair, a bitter smile twisting his lips. Delilah had been systematically draining their joint account for months. If he hadn't caught on now, how much more would she have taken? His cell phone buzzed on the desk. A text from Mike, his foreman. Henderson approved the final inspection. We're all clear. Good news that should have lifted his spirits, but John felt nothing. The Henderson project represented a $2.3 million contract for whole construction money that Delilah would try to claim half of in the divorce that now seemed inevitable. Unless he moved first. John opened a new browser tab and logged into his business banking platform. As the sole owner of Holt Construction, he had complete control over the company accounts. Delilah's name wasn't on any of them, a precaution he'd taken years ago when he first suspected her of infidelity. She knew about the main business account, but not the others that he transferred the recent Henderson payment to one of his private accounts, then returned to their joint personal account. Without hesitation, he initiated a transfer of the entire balance to another private account that Delilah knew nothing about. $127,843.21 transferred to account ending in 4872. The screen refreshed. Balance $0.00. Next, John logged into their investment portfolio. Again, Delilah's name was on the account, but she'd never bothered to learn how it worked or what it contained. He quickly transferred all liquid assets to his secure accounts, leaving only the illiquid investments that couldn't be easily moved. Those would have to wait. With methodical precision, John then moved to their credit card accounts. One by one, he logged in and canceled the additional cards issued in Delilah's name. American Express, canceled. Visa Black Card, canceled. The Nordstrom card she loved so much, canceled. He called the credit card companies directly for the ones he couldn't manage online. I'd like to report my wife's card as lost, he told the customer service representative. Yes, please cancel it immediately and don't issue a replacement. He worked through the list with cold efficiency, imagining Delilah's face when she tried to use a card and found it declined. The thought brought him no joy, only a sense of justice being served. That be why the time John finished, 2 hours had passed. He rubbed his eyes and looked at his phone. No calls or texts from Delilah. She was probably too busy celebrating her freedom with Xavier to worry about money yet. But she would, soon enough. John stood and walked to the window, looking out at the manicured lawn and the neighborhood beyond. From the outside, everything looked perfect. The successful businessman, the beautiful wife, the nice house in a good neighborhood. No one would guess the rot that had festered beneath the surface that a knock at the office door interrupted his thoughts. What? He called, not turning from the window. The door opened, and Aubrey stepped in. Her demeanor notably changed. Gone was the sneering confidence from earlier, replaced by a carefully constructed mask of contrition. Dad, can we talk? Her voice was softer than usual, the tone she adopted when she wanted something. John turned slowly. About what? Aubrey twisted a strand of hair around her finger, a nervous habit she'd had since childhood. About what happened earlier. I said some things I didn't mean. Did you? John leaned against the windowsill, arms crossed over his chest. Or are you just worried about what happens to you now that your mother's gone? Aubrey's fake smile faltered. That's not fair. I'm just trying to apologize. No, you're not. You're trying to secure your position. You're worried I'll cut you off. Aubrey's facade crumbled. You wouldn't do that. You've always taken care of me. And how have you repaid that care, Aubrey? By mocking me behind my back? By encouraging your mother's affairs? I didn't. Don't lie to me. John cut her off sharply. I heard you. Mom, you should just go stay with Xavier. He's way better than Dad. Your exact words. Aubrey's face flushed. I was just saying what she wanted to hear. And what about calling me an ATM? Was that just saying what she wanted to hear, too? I didn't mean it like that. John laughed, a sound devoid of humor. You meant exactly what you said. You've both seen me as nothing but a wallet for years. Aubrey took a step closer, desperation creeping into her voice. That's not true. We're family. Family. John shook his head. Family doesn't betray each other. Family doesn't cheat and lie and steal. I never stole from you. No? What about the extra textbooks I paid for that somehow turned into designer clothes? Or the study group trips that were actually weekends with Jordan at hotels I paid for? Aubrey's eyes widened. How did you? I'm not an idiot, Aubrey. I've known what you've been doing. I just chose to ignore it because I thought we were family, as you say." Aubrey's lips trembled. Real tears now, not the fake ones she usually employed to get her way. "What are you going to do?" "Nothing," John replied. "I'm going to do absolutely nothing." Confusion crossed her face. "What does that mean?" "It means I'm done providing, done caring, done trying." "But you're an adult now, Aubrey. 19 years old. Old enough to make your own choices and live with the consequences. You can't just cut me off." "What about college? My apartment? My car?" John shrugged. "What about them? I'm sure your mother and Xavier will be happy to help. Or Jordan. He seems very supportive." "You know they can't." Aubrey nearly shouted, panic rising in her voice. "Mom doesn't work. Xavier's broke. And Jordan's just a student. Not my problem anymore." Aubrey's tears flowed freely now. "Please, Dad. I'm sorry. I'll change. I'll be better." For a moment, John felt a flicker of the affection he'd once had for this girl he'd raised as his own. But then he remembered her cruel laughter, her complete lack of respect, her willingness to betray him alongside her mother. "It's too late for that, Aubrey. You made your choice when you sided with your mother. Now you get to live with it." "What am I supposed to do?" she asked, her voice small. "Whatever adults do when they need money. Get a job, perhaps." "A job." Aubrey repeated the word as if it were foreign. "But I'm in college." "Many students work while studying. It builds character." John walked to his desk and sat down, turning his attention back to his laptop. "Close the door on your way out." Aubrey stood there, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. Finally, she turned and stormed out, slamming the door behind her. John stared at the closed door, waiting for the guilt to come. It didn't. Instead, he felt a cold satisfaction. Phase 1 of his plan was complete. Delilah and Aubrey had made their bed, thinking there would be no consequences. Now they would learn how wrong they were. His phone buzzed with a text from Delilah. "Xavier's place is amazing. So glad I made this decision. Don't wait up." John smiled grimly. She had no idea what was coming. The next morning, John rose at his usual time of 5:30 a.m. He showered, dressed in his customary suit, and headed downstairs to make coffee. The house was quiet. Aubrey rarely woke before noon, giving him time to think and plan his next move. That he stood at the kitchen counter, sipping his black coffee and checking emails on his phone. 3 new contracts pending for Holt Construction. A request for a bid on a major commercial development downtown. His business was thriving, despite the chaos in his personal life. John had built his construction company from nothing. Starting as a laborer in his 20s, he'd worked his way up, learned the trade, saved every penny, and eventually launched his own business. Now, 15 years later, Holt Construction employed 35 people and had contracts worth millions. It was his life's work, his legacy, and Delilah had contributed nothing to it. She'd married him when the company was already successful, when the hardest years were behind him. She'd enjoyed the fruits of his labor without understanding or appreciating the sacrifices he'd made to create their comfortable life. John refilled his coffee cup and opened the refrigerator. Nearly empty. Delilah had been responsible for grocery shopping, one of the few household tasks she claimed to handle, but she clearly hadn't bothered before leaving. Typical. He closed the refrigerator and checked his watch. 6:45 a.m. Time to leave for work. He grabbed his briefcase and car keys and headed for the door. As he passed the living room, he caught sight of Aubrey's purse and phone on the coffee table. She must have left them there last night. On impulse, he picked up her phone. No password protection, another sign of her carelessness. He scrolled through her recent messages. T.O. Jordan. Mom's finally leaving Dad for Xavier. About time. To a friend named Megan. Dad's such a pushover. He'll keep paying for everything even after Mom leaves him. What's he gonna do? To her mother, sent just an hour after Delilah had left. Dad's acting weird. Talking about cutting me off. You need to talk to him when you call tomorrow. John set the phone down, his resolve strengthening. They truly saw him as nothing but a resource to be exploited. Well, resources could be withdrawn. He left the house and drove to his office downtown. His assistant, Rebecca, greeted him with a stack of contracts and a concerned look. "Everything okay, Mr. Holt?" You don't usually come in this early on Wednesdays. Everything's fine, Rebecca, he replied, taking the contracts. Just some changes at home that freed up my schedule. If you say so. She didn't look convinced, but knew better than to pry. The Westlake developers called again. They're eager to move forward with that shopping center project. Tell them I'll review their proposal today. John entered his office and closed the door, but he spent the morning in meetings and phone calls, maintaining his usual professional demeanor despite the turmoil in his personal life. No one who dealt with him would guess that his marriage had imploded less than 24 hours ago. Around 11 a.m., his phone buzzed with a text from Aubrey. Dad, send me my allowance. It's the 15th. John didn't respond immediately. He finished reviewing a contract, made his notes, and then picked up his phone. He typed, "Come to my office. We need to talk." Aubrey replied instantly, "Can't. In class. Just send it to my account like always." John smiled grimly. She wasn't in class. Her Wednesday schedule had no classes before 2 p.m., a fact she thought he didn't know. Another lie, another manipulation that he called her instead of texting back. She answered on the fourth ring, her voice hushed. "Dad, I told you I'm in class." "No, you're not. Your anthropology class doesn't start until 2. A pause. "I'm in the library, studying." "Aubrey, stop lying. It doesn't work anymore." She sighed dramatically. "Fine. What do you want?" "I want you to come to my office so we can discuss your financial situation. Just send my allowance." "It's not complicated." John's patience thinned. "Allowance? What allowance?" "Very funny, Dad. The $2,000 you send me every month. You know, for my apartment, car, food, and stuff." "I'm not laughing, Aubrey. There is no allowance anymore." There was a moment of stunned silence before Aubrey's voice came back, high and panicky. "What do you mean, no allowance? You can't just cut me off." "I can, and I have. But my rent is due in 3 days, and I need to fill up my car. Your mother isn't here. She could take care of you now." John repeated the line he'd rehearsed in his mind. "Mom? She doesn't have any money of her own. You know that. That's not my problem anymore." Aubrey's voice rose to a near scream. "You can't do that." John remained calm. "I just did. I'll call Mom right now. She'll make you pay. Go ahead." John heard rustling as Aubrey presumably pulled her phone away from her ear to call Delilah. He waited patiently, knowing exactly what would happen next. A minute later, Aubrey came back on the line, panic now evident in her voice. "She's not answering." "I'm shocked," John replied dryly. "This isn't funny, Dad. What am I supposed to do? How am I supposed to pay my bills?" "Get a job, Aubrey. Like everyone else in the world." "A job? I'm a full-time student. When would I have time to work? You seem to have plenty of time to party with Jordan and go shopping with your friends. I'm sure you can find a few hours for employment. This is so unfair." Aubrey's voice cracked. "You can't just change the rules without warning." "I didn't change the rules, Aubrey. You and your mother did when you decided I was nothing more than an ATM. I didn't mean that. It was just a joke. It wasn't funny." Aubrey switched tactics, her voice softening. "Daddy, please. I'm sorry about what I said. I really am. I was just upset and confused. Mom's been filling my head with all this stuff about Xavier, and I didn't know what to think." The daddy ploy her standard move when all else failed. It might have worked once, but not anymore. "Say the act, Aubrey. I'm not changing my mind." "You're being cruel," she shouted, abandoning the sweet daughter routine as quickly as she'd adopted it. "Is this how you get back at Mom? By punishing me?" "This isn't punishment, Aubrey. This is reality. Adults pay their own bills." "I hate you," she spat. "You're going to regret this. Goodbye, Aubrey." John ended the call and set his phone down on his desk. He expected to feel something: sadness, guilt, regret, but there was only a cold certainty that he was doing what needed to be done. His phone immediately buzzed with text from Aubrey. "Answer me. You can't do this to me. I'm telling everyone what an asshole you are." John silenced his phone and turned back to his work. Let her rage. Let her struggle. Let her learn what life was like when you burned bridges with the people who supported you. An hour later, Rebecca knocked on his door. "Mr. Holt? Your wife is on line 1. She says it's urgent." Of course. Aubrey would have reached her by now. "Thank you, Rebecca." John picked up the desk phone. "Delilah. What the hell do you think you're doing? Delilah's voice was tight with anger. Aubrey just called me hysterical because you've cut her off. Hello to you too. Enjoying your time with Xavier. Don't change the subject. You can't punish Aubrey because you're mad at me. John leaned back in his chair. I'm not punishing anyone. I'm simply adjusting my financial commitments based on recent changes in my household. Cut the corporate bullshit, John. You're being petty and vindictive. Am I? How much money have you sent Xavier in the past 6 months, Delilah? From our joint account. A pause. That's different, is it? You chose him over me. You left our home to be with him. Why should I continue supporting you? This isn't about me. It's about Aubrey. The same Aubrey who encouraged you to leave? Who called me an ATM and laughed at the idea of me being used for money. That Aubrey. Delilah's voice shifted to a cajoling tone. John, honey, she's just a kid. She doesn't understand what she's saying. She was just trying to support me. She's 19, Delilah. A legal adult. Old enough to understand exactly what she was saying. So that's it. You're just cutting her off without warning because your feelings are hurt. John's grip tightened on the phone. My feelings aren't hurt, Delilah. They're gone. You and Aubrey made sure of that. What's that supposed to mean? It means I've spent the last decade providing for both of you, and in return, I got mockery and betrayal. I'm done. You can't be serious. What about Aubrey's tuition? Her apartment? Her car payments? Not my problem anymore. You wanted freedom from me? Congratulations. You're free. All of you. You bastard. Delilah hissed. You won't get away with this. I'll sue you for every penny you have. John smiled, though she couldn't see it. Good luck with that. You might want to check our bank accounts before you hire a lawyer. What? There was a pause, and John could hear the sound of typing in the background. Then a gasp. What did you do? I protected my assets. Something you should have thought about before cheating on me with your ex-husband. You can't just take all our money. That's illegal. Half of it was mine, Delilah. The other half, well, let's just say the law doesn't look kindly on spouses who use joint funds to finance affairs. I'll destroy you for this. Delilah's voice had risen to a shriek. You think you're so clever, but you have no idea what I'm capable of. Actually, I do. I've seen what you're capable of for years. I just chose to ignore it. That was my mistake. This isn't over, John. Yes, it is. You made your choice, Delilah. Now you get to live with it. He hung up before she could respond, then disconnected his desk phone. Let her call his cell if she wanted to continue the conversation. He had work to do. John opened his laptop and pulled up his email. It was time to contact his lawyer. Divorce proceedings needed to be initiated immediately, before Delilah could try to claim more than she deserved. As he typed out the email, John felt a sense of freedom he hadn't experienced in years. The parasites that had been draining him financially, emotionally, mentally were being cut off. The pain of betrayal was still there, a dull ache beneath his ribs, but it was already being replaced by something stronger. Resolve. They had underestimated him. They had mistaken his generosity for weakness, his patience for passivity. They had assumed they could use him and discard him without consequences. They were wrong. John sent the email to his lawyer and checked his watch. Not even noon yet, and he'd already set in motion the destruction of the life Delilah and Aubrey had taken for granted. There was more to be done, much more, but this was a start at a text from an unknown number lit up his phone. This is Xavier. Delilah says you've cut her off. We need to talk. John blocked the number without replying. Xavier was even more delusional than Delilah if he thought there was anything to discuss. Another text came in, this one from a number he recognized. Jordan, Aubrey's boyfriend. Mr. Holt, Aubrey told me what happened. Maybe we can work something out? I really care about your daughter. John snorted. The only thing Jordan cared about was the lifestyle Aubrey's allowance had afforded him. He blocked that number too. His phone kept buzzing with messages from Aubrey, increasingly desperate. Dad, please, I'm begging you. I need my allowance. My landlord is going to evict me if I don't pay rent. At least pay my tuition. Don't ruin my future. John ignored them all. They'd chosen their path. They'd made their bed. Now they would have to lie in it. Delilah Holt stood outside Xavier's apartment building, disappointment already settling on her shoulders like an unwelcome weight. This wasn't the upscale complex she'd pictured during their late-night phone calls. The building's faded brick exterior and cracked concrete steps hardly matched Xavier's descriptions of his sweet pad in the nice part of town. She checked the address on her phone again. Apartment 3B. This was definitely it. With a sigh, she dragged her Louis Vuitton suitcase up the steps. The lobby smelled of stale cigarettes and cheap cleaning products. The elevator had an out-of-order sign taped to it, forcing her to climb 2 flights of stairs in her designer heels. By the time she reached Xavier's door, sweat beaded on her forehead, and her initial excitement had morphed into dread. She knocked 3 times, forcing a smile on her face. This was still better than staying with John, she told herself. Xavier was exciting, passionate, everything John wasn't. The door swung open to reveal Xavier Marks in a stained tank top and gym shorts, a beer can in hand despite the early hour. At 41, he still had the charming smile that had first caught her attention years ago, but the rest of him had deteriorated. His once athletic frame had softened, and his eyes lacked the sharp focus she remembered. "Babe, you made it." Xavier leaned in for a kiss, his breath heavy with alcohol. Delilah turned her face slightly, receiving the kiss on her cheek. "It's 10 in the morning, Xavier. You're drinking already." Xavier laughed, raising his beer can in a mock toast. "It's a celebration. My woman's finally back where she belongs." "Your woman?" Delilah raised an eyebrow, but forced another smile. "Let me in. I've been dragging this suitcase forever." Xavier stepped aside, and Delilah entered the apartment, her heart sinking further with every step. The living room was small and cluttered. A worn-out couch faced an outdated television. Pizza boxes and beer cans littered the coffee table. The kitchenette visible beyond hadn't been cleaned in weeks, judging by the stack of dishes and takeout containers. "What do you think?" Xavier gestured around. "Bachelor pad, but I can make space for your stuff." Delilah set her suitcase down carefully, afraid to let it touch the stained carpet. "It's cozy. Hey, it's not that mansion you've been living in with old man Holt, but it's home." Xavier flopped onto the couch and patted the spot beside him. "Come sit. Tell me everything. How'd he take it when you told him you were leaving?" Delilah remained standing, surveying the room with growing dismay. He barely reacted, just said, "All right," and let me go. "For real? No begging you to stay? No tears?" Xavier laughed. "Man's got no spine." "It was strange," Delilah admitted, thinking back to John's cold eyes. "I expected him to fight harder." "Who cares? You're here now." Xavier took another swig of beer. "We can finally pick up where we left off without him in the picture." Delilah forced herself to sit beside Xavier, keeping her designer dress from touching the stained cushions as best she could. "Where's the bedroom? I need to unpack." "Through there." Xavier pointed to a door at the end of a short hallway. "Bathroom's on the right. Water pressure sucks, but it gets hot eventually." Delilah carried her suitcase to the bedroom, which was marginally cleaner than the living room, but just as depressing. A queen-size mattress sat directly on the floor, covered with rumpled sheets. A single dresser with a broken drawer completed the furnishings. She returned to the living room, unable to hide her disappointment any longer. "Xavier, this isn't what I expected. You told me you had a nice place." Xavier shrugged. "It is nice for what I can afford. What happened to the money I sent you?" Delilah crossed her arms. "I've been sending you thousands for months." "Yeah, about that." Xavier scratched his neck. "Rent in this area ain't cheap, you know? And I had some debts to pay off." "Rent? You told me you owned this place." "Did I?" Xavier grinned sheepishly. "Must have been the heat of the moment, baby. You know how I get when we're talking late at night." Delilah's blood ran cold. "The new car you said you bought?" "Ah, that's still in the works. Soon, though. And your new job? The management position." Xavier's smile faded. "Look, the economy's tough right now. I've got some applications out, but nothing's come through yet." Delilah stared at him in disbelief. "Wait, you don't have a job?" "Not at the moment." Xavier finished his beer and crushed the can. "But I've got prospects. A buddy of mine might hook me up at his construction company." He laughed. "Ironic, right? Working for a guy like your husband." Delilah's head spun. "So what have you been doing for money?" Xavier stretched out on the couch, his shirt riding up to reveal his softening midsection. "Getting by. Odd jobs. Plus the help from you." "The help from me," Delilah repeated flatly. You mean John's money that I sent you? Xavier's eyes gleamed. Why would I need a steady job when I have you? He reached for her hand. You're my meal ticket now, babe. Holt's loaded, and you're entitled to half. We'll be set for life once the divorce goes through. That's not. Delilah pulled her hand away. I left John because we didn't connect anymore. Because you and I had something special. We do. Xavier sat up straighter. But let's be real. You also left because you know you can take him for everything he's worth. Delilah's phone buzzed with a text from Aubrey. MOM. Dad cut me off. He won't send my allowance. Call me back. What's wrong? Xavier asked, seeing her expression change. It's Aubrey. She says John cut off her allowance. Delilah frowned, typing a quick reply to her daughter. Well, that's a problem, Xavier said, his tone suddenly serious. You think he'll cut you off too? He wouldn't dare. Delilah stood up, pacing the small room. Half of everything is legally mine. He can't just. Her phone buzzed again, a banking alert. She opened it, her face paling. No. What? Xavier sat up, genuinely concerned now. Our joint account. It's empty. Her fingers flew across the phone screen. All the credit cards declined. He canceled everything. What? Xavier's voice rose an octave. But you said. I know what I said. Delilah snapped. I didn't think he'd react this way. John's always been so passive. Xavier stood up, his demeanor changing dramatically. So what you're saying is, you've got no money. I have money, Delilah insisted. It's just tied up in the house and investments. I'll call my lawyer today and we'll straighten this out. And how long will that take? I don't know. A few weeks, maybe. Xavier ran a hand through his thinning hair. A few weeks? Delilah, rent's due next week. I was counting on you to cover it. You were counting on me. Delilah's voice rose. I left my husband for you, and I'm thrilled about that, Xavier said quickly, putting his arms around her. But we gotta be practical. If Holt's playing hardball with the money, we need a plan. Delilah pushed him away, reality crashing down around her. She had left $1 million home for this dump. She had traded financial security for a man who saw her as a meal ticket. She had given up everything for Xavier, and now she was beginning to see him clearly for the first time in years. I need some air, she said, grabbing her purse. I'm going for a walk. Hey, while you're out, could you grab some beer? Xavier called after her. I'm almost out, and I don't get paid till you hook me up with some cash. Delilah didn't answer. She slammed the door behind her, leaning against it as tears threatened to spill. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. Xavier was supposed to have a beautiful apartment, a good job, a plan. He was supposed to be her escape from a loveless marriage, not another burden. She pulled out her phone and tried calling John. The call went straight to voicemail. She tried again with the same result. Either his phone was off, or more likely, he had blocked her number. For the first time, Delilah felt a pang of fear. John had never acted like this before. He had always been the reliable one, the stable one, the one she could count on to forgive her transgressions. But something in his eyes yesterday had been different. Something had changed. She considered calling Aubrey again, but hesitated. What did she tell her daughter? That she'd made a terrible mistake? That they were both cut off from the money they'd taken for granted? Instead, she started walking down the filthy hallway toward the stairs, her designer heels clicking on the stained linoleum. She had made her choice. She had left John for Xavier. She had chosen excitement over stability, passion over security, and now she would have to live with the consequences. John sat at his home office, watching the security footage on his laptop. He had installed hidden cameras throughout the house months ago, when he first suspected Delilah's infidelity. Now those same cameras were giving him a front row seat to Aubrey's latest scheme. On the screen, Aubrey paced the living room, phone pressed to her ear. Jordan, just come over. Dad's at work, and I need you. John smiled grimly. He had indeed gone to work that morning, but had returned home during lunch when he saw Aubrey's car still in the driveway. Now he sat silently in his office, monitoring her every move. 20 minutes later, the doorbell rang. On the security feed, Aubrey rushed to answer it, admitting Jordan Price into the house. The 21-year-old college dropout was wearing ripped jeans and a wrinkled button-up, his attempt at looking presentable falling short. Thanks for coming, Aubrey said, pulling Jordan into the living room. I didn't know who else to call. Hey, I'm always here for you, babe, Jordan replied, plopping down on the couch that John had paid for. What's this emergency? Aubrey's face contorted with anger. My dad cut me off. No warning, nothing. Just called this morning and said there's no more allowance. Jordan's expression changed instantly from concern to alarm. What? But how are you going to pay for stuff? Exactly. Aubrey threw her hands up. My rent, my car payment, my credit cards, all of it. It's like he's lost his mind. Jordan shifted uncomfortably. So what are you going to do? I don't know yet. Aubrey paced in front of him. Mom's not answering her phone. She's too busy playing house with Xavier to care about me. That's messed up, Jordan said, though John noted the young man's eyes were more focused on his own concerns than Aubrey's distress. So what does this mean? He hesitated. No more shopping trips? No more weekends at the resort. Aubrey shot him a look. Is that all you care about? My life is falling apart. No, babe, that's not what I meant. Jordan backpedaled quickly. I'm just trying to understand the situation. The situation is that my dad is being a vindictive jerk because Mom left him. Aubrey spat. But he's not going to get away with it. What do you mean? Jordan leaned forward. Aubrey's voice lowered, but the hidden microphone caught every word. My dad can't touch me. I'll make his life hell first. How? Jordan looked genuinely curious now. I know things, Aubrey said with a smirk. Things about his business. About his taxes. I've heard him talking on the phone. John's eyes narrowed as he watched. Aubrey was bluffing. She had never shown the slightest interest in his business, but the threat itself was enough. So what? You're going to report him or something? Jordan asked. Maybe. Or maybe I'll start telling his clients about how he treats his family. Ruin his reputation. Aubrey's smile turned nasty. I could even trash the house. What's he going to do, call the cops on his own daughter? Jordan looked increasingly uncomfortable. I don't know, Aubrey. That sounds like it could backfire. Don't be such a coward, Aubrey snapped. He thinks he can control me with money, but I'll show him. And once he realizes he can't win, he'll start paying again. If you say so, Jordan mumbled. Aubrey moved to sit beside him on the couch, her demeanor changing instantly. Enough about my dad. We have a house to ourselves. She ran a hand up Jordan's arm. Let's take advantage of it. John continued watching as things progressed on the couch. He felt no guilt about recording them. This was his house, and they were discussing illegal actions against him. Besides, Aubrey was technically an adult, responsible for her own choices. When things moved to the bedroom, Aubrey's idea, loudly announced on camera, John waited patiently. The extra cameras he'd installed in the common areas of the house gave him all the evidence he needed. Aubrey explicitly plotting to damage his business and property. Jordan agreeing to help her. Both of them bad-mouthing him in the crudest terms imaginable. All of it captured in high definition, with crystal-clear audio. John copied the relevant sections of footage to a separate folder. Then he pulled up the contact information he'd gathered months ago. Jordan's mother's email, his college dean's address, and for good measure, the email of Jordan's academic advisor. He composed 3 separate emails, each tailored to its recipient. To Jordan's mother, he wrote about her son's disrespect and plans to help damage property. To the dean and advisor, he focused on the academic misconduct Jordan had casually mentioned while bragging to Aubrey about cheating on exams. To each email, he attached selected clips from the security footage, nothing explicit, but enough to make it clear that Jordan was not the upstanding young man he pretended to be. John sent the emails, then leaned back in his chair. Phase 2 of his plan was in motion. Aubrey and Jordan had no idea what was coming. 3 hours later, while Aubrey and Jordan were still in her bedroom, John's phone vibrated with an email notification. It was from Jordan's mother, a horrified, apologetic message expressing her shock at her son's behavior and assuring John that she would handle the situation immediately. John smiled. Mrs. Price was a traditional woman who controlled the purse strings in her family. Jordan's comfortable lifestyle was about to change dramatically to AS if on cue. Jordan's phone began ringing incessantly in the living room. The security feed showed Aubrey and Jordan emerging from the bedroom, Jordan grabbing his phone with a frown. "It's my mom," he said, staring at the screen. "She's called like 10 times. So answer it," Aubrey said, running a hand through her tousled hair. Jordan stepped away, answering the call. "Hey, Mom, what's—" Even from his office, John could hear the woman's voice screaming through the phone. Jordan's face paled, and he turned away from Aubrey. "What are you talking about?" Jordan asked, panic rising in his voice. "What video?" "I didn't." More shouting from the other end. "Mom, I can explain." Aubrey approached, concern on her face. "What's going on?" Jordan held up a hand to silence her, his face growing paler by the second. "Mom, please don't do this. I need that money for—" The conversation continued for several minutes, with Jordan growing increasingly desperate. Finally, he lowered the phone, staring at it in disbelief. "What happened?" Aubrey demanded. "My mom. She says she got a video of us talking about trashing her dad's house. She's cutting me off. No more tuition, no more allowance, no more car insurance. Nothing." "What? How?" Aubrey looked around the room wildly. "There's no one else here." Jordan's phone dinged with an email notification. He opened it, then cursed loudly. "The dean just emailed me. I have to report to the Academic Integrity Board tomorrow morning." He looked up at Aubrey, his eyes wide. "They know about the exams I cheated on. They're talking about expulsion." "That's impossible," Aubrey insisted. "How would they know?" "I don't know," Jordan shouted, panic overtaking him. "But my mom says your dad sent her a video of us talking in this room today. She says he has cameras." "Cameras?" Aubrey repeated, her face paling. "He's been spying on us." "Apparently." Jordan paced the room, running hands through his hair. "This is insane. I'm ruined. My mom's cutting me off, the school's kicking me out, all because I came over here today." Aubrey reached for him. "Jordan, calm down. We'll figure this out." He jerked away from her touch. "Figure what out? My life is over. Everything I've worked for, gone in one day. It's not my fault." Aubrey protested. "Isn't it?" Jordan turned on her, his face contorted with rage. "You're the one who called me over here. You're the one who started talking about messing with your dad's business. You're the one who got me into this. That's not fair. How was I supposed to know he had cameras? You ruined my life, you crazy bitch." Jordan shouted, grabbing his jacket from the couch. "We're done. I never want to see you again." "Jordan, wait." Aubrey grabbed his arm. "You can't just leave me now. I need you." "You need my money, you mean?" Jordan sneered, pulling away. "Well, guess what? I don't have any more, thanks to you and your psycho dad." "That's not true. I love you. Save it." Jordan headed for the door. "Find yourself another sucker to pay your bills." "Jordan," Aubrey called after him, but the front door slammed shut. Alone in the living room, Aubrey pulled out her phone with shaking hands. John watched as she dialed Delilah's number. The call went straight to voicemail, as John had known it would. "Mom, it's me. I really need to talk to you. Dad's gone crazy. He had cameras in the house, and now Jordan broke up with me, and everything's falling apart. Please call me back." Aubrey sank onto the couch, tears streaming down her face. For a moment, John almost felt sorry for her. Almost. Then he remembered her words from earlier. "My dad can't touch me. I'll make his life hell first." She had brought this on herself. John closed his laptop and stood up. Time to make his presence known. He walked downstairs and into the living room, finding Aubrey still crying on the couch. "Rough day?" he asked mildly. Aubrey's head snapped up, her tear-streaked face morphing from surprise to rage. "You bastard. You were spying on me." "Spying? In my own home?" John shook his head. "I'd call it protecting my property from someone who explicitly threatened to damage it. You had no right to record me. Actually, I had every right. This is my house, and you were discussing illegal activities inside it. You sent that video to Jordan's mom and his school." Aubrey stood up, hands balled into fists at her sides. "How could you do that to me?" "I didn't do anything to you, Aubrey." Jordan faced the consequences of his own actions. "As will you. What's that supposed to mean?" John smiled coldly. "It means your plan to make my life hell has backfired. Jordan's gone. Your allowance is gone. Your mother is unreachable. Where does that leave you? You're enjoying this, aren't you?" Aubrey's voice shook with rage. "Destroying my life because Mom left you? Your life isn't destroyed, Aubrey. It's simply changed. You're an adult now, facing adult consequences for your choices." "I hate you," she screamed, tears flowing freely. "You're not even my real dad." "No," John agreed calmly. "I'm not. But I raised you, provided for you, gave you everything you wanted. And how did you repay me? By plotting against me in my own home." Aubrey's shoulders slumped. The fight seemed to drain out of her all at once. "What am I supposed to do now? I have nothing." "That's not true. You have your youth, your health, your education. You have more than most people your age." John turned to leave, then paused. "Oh, and Aubrey, you have 30 days to find a new place to live. Consider this your formal notice." "You're kicking me out? Where am I supposed to go? That's not my problem anymore." John headed for the door. "And Aubrey, those cameras are staying on. Don't try anything stupid." He left her standing in the living room, speechless for once. As he walked to his car, John felt no satisfaction in her distress, only a grim determination to see this through to the end. Aubrey had shown her true colors. She had threatened him, mocked him, plotted against him. Now she was learning that actions have consequences. 2 days later, John sat in his office at Holt Construction, reviewing the final preparations for the next phase of his plan. On his laptop screen, an audio file was ready to be uploaded to several social media platforms through anonymous accounts he had created months ago when he first suspected Delilah's betrayal. The file contained selections from his security recordings. Delilah admitting her affair with Xavier, discussing how she had been secretly sending him money, Aubrey calling John an ATM and encouraging her mother's infidelity. All of the worst moments, carefully edited together to tell the story of their betrayal in their own words. John had considered this step carefully. Public exposure would irrevocably change all their lives. Once this audio went public, there would be no going back. No reconciliation. No forgiveness. But then, John had no interest in reconciliation or forgiveness. Delilah and Aubrey had shown him exactly who they were. Now he would show everyone else. His office phone rang. It was Rebecca, his assistant. "Mr. Holt, Mrs. Westlake is here to see you about the shopping center project." "Send her in." "Thank you." John closed the audio file and straightened his tie. Business came first. The retribution could wait another hour. Eleanor Westlake entered, elegant in a tailored suit, her silver hair cut in a stylish bob. At 62, she was one of the shrewdest real estate developers in Texas and a fixture in the social circles that Delilah had desperately tried to penetrate. "John, good to see you," she said, shaking his hand firmly. "I'm eager to move forward with the project." "As am I, Eleanor. Please have a seat." John gestured to the chair opposite his desk. "I've reviewed the revised plans, and I think we've addressed all your concerns." They spent the next 45 minutes discussing the construction timeline, materials, and budget for the new shopping center. Eleanor was thorough and direct, qualities John appreciated in a client. As they wrapped up, Eleanor's expression softened slightly. "John, forgive me for being personal, but I heard that Delilah has left." John kept his face neutral. "News travels fast." "It's a small community," Eleanor said with a shrug. "For what it's worth, I think you're better off. Delilah never fit in with our circle, always trying too hard." "I appreciate your candor." Eleanor studied him thoughtfully. "Will this affect the project in any way?" "Divorces can be messy, especially with the financial entanglements." "Not all," John assured her. "My personal and business finances are separate, and the project is fully funded. Delilah has no claim on Holt Construction." "Good to hear." Eleanor stood, gathering her documents. "I've never been one to gossip, John, but people are talking. Delilah's been telling some stories about you that don't match the man I've known for years." John's jaw tightened slightly. "Is that so?" "Nothing specific, just implications that you mistreated her, controlled her. The usual divorce narrative." Eleanor's eyes were sharp. "Most of us don't believe a word of it." "Thank you, Eleanor. That means more than you know." After she left, John returned to his laptop and opened the audio file again. His finger hovered over the upload button. Eleanor's words had confirmed what he suspected. Delilah was already trying to control the narrative, to paint herself as the victim. Time to set the record straight. He pressed the button, and the upload process began. Within minutes, the audio file would be live on multiple platforms, shared from anonymous accounts to various community groups and mutual friends. By evening, everyone in their social circle would have heard Delilah and Aubrey's true feelings about him, in their own words. John closed his laptop and left the office, telling Rebecca he would be working from home for the rest of the day. He wanted to be away from prying eyes when the fallout began. By the time John reached his house, his phone was already buzzing with notifications. Friends, acquaintances, business associates, all reaching out after hearing the recording. Some expressed shock, others sympathy. Most assured him they were firmly on his side. John answered none of them. This wasn't about gaining sympathy or support. It was about truth, about consequences. Around 7 p.m., his doorbell rang. John checked the security camera and saw Mike, his foreman and closest friend, standing on the porch with a six-pack of beer. John let him in. "Figured you could use a friend tonight," Mike said, handing John a beer. "Thanks." John led him to the kitchen, where they sat at the island. "So that audio," Mike began, popping the tab on his can. "That's really them? Delilah and Aubrey." "It is." John took a sip of his beer. "Recorded in this house 2 days ago." Mike shook his head in disbelief. "Man, I knew things weren't great between you two, but I never thought she'd actually cheat. With her ex, no less." "Xavier Marks is just the latest," John said flatly. "There have been others." Mike's eyebrows shot up. "For real? How long have you known?" "Suspected for years. Confirmed it months ago." John stared at his beer can. "I should have ended it then, but I kept hoping things would change." "And Aubrey? That girl you raised like your own, calling you an ATM? That's Cole, man." "Aubrey has always been her mother's daughter." John's voice was devoid of emotion. "I was convenient, nothing more." Mike leaned forward. "Well, they're getting what they deserve now. Jennifer says all the women in the club are cutting Delilah off. No one's returning her calls or texts. Jennifer was Mike's wife and a member of the country club, where Delilah had desperately tried to climb the social ladder. And Carla, who works at the college admissions office." Mike continued. "She says Aubrey's basically a pariah on campus now. Word spread fast after that audio hit. Nobody wants anything to do with her." John nodded, unsurprised. Delilah and Aubrey had built their lives on appearances, on being accepted by the right people. The audio had destroyed that carefully constructed facade in an instant. "What happens now?" Mike asked. "Now, they live with the consequences of their choices," John replied simply. Later that night, after Mike had gone, John's phone rang. It was a number he didn't recognize, but he answered anyway. "John Holt, you son of a bitch." Delilah's voice was raw with fury. "How dare you release that recording?" John leaned back in his chair. "Hello, Delilah. Enjoying your time with Xavier." "You've ruined me," she shrieked. "No one will talk to me. Eleanor Westlake canceled our lunch. Barbara Franklin uninvited me from her charity gala. How terrible for you. This is slander. I'll sue you." "It's not slander if it's true, Delilah. Those are your words, not mine. You recorded me without my knowledge. In my home, where I have every legal right to do so, especially when you're discussing how you've been stealing from me." Delilah's voice turned pleading. "John, please, take it down. I'll come home. We can work this out." John almost laughed. "Come home? There's nothing to work out, Delilah. You made your choice." "Xavier kicked me out," she blurted. "He got mad when he found out my credit cards were canceled. Said I misled him about the money. How unfortunate. I have nowhere to go, John. Please. That's not my problem anymore. You bastard." Her voice rose again. "After everything we've been through." "Everything we've been through," John repeated flatly. "You mean your affairs? The money you stole? The years of disrespect? I made mistakes. People make mistakes. These weren't mistakes, Delilah. They were choices. Deliberate choices you made every day for years. And now you're facing the consequences. What am I supposed to do?" Real fear crept in her voice. "I have no money, no home, no friends. Perhaps you should have thought of that before you left. You can't do this to me. I'm your wife. Not for much longer. My lawyer will be contacting you about the divorce proceedings." John hung up, blocking the number immediately after. He had no doubt Delilah would try calling again, perhaps with a different approach. Tears, promises, threats, he'd seen them all before. But this time, he was immune. His phone pinged with a text from an unknown number. "Dad, please answer. It's Aubrey. I really need to talk to you." John blocked that number too. Another notification appeared in email from his lawyer confirming that the divorce paperwork had been filed. In Texas, they would be required to wait at least 60 days before the divorce could be finalized, but the process had begun. John closed his laptop and walked to the window, looking out at the quiet street. In just a few days, he had dismantled the false life Delilah and Aubrey had built around him. He had cut off their money, exposed their betrayal, destroyed their social standing, and severed their remaining connections, and he felt nothing but cold satisfaction. They had treated him like an object, a resource to be used and discarded. They had mocked him, betrayed him, stolen from him. They had shown no respect, no loyalty, no love. Now they were learning what life was like without his support, without his protection, without his generosity. They were sleeping in the bed they had made. And John had no intention of making it more comfortable for them. 5 days had passed since John had uploaded the audio recordings. 5 days of blessed silence in his home. 5 days of focused work and peaceful evenings without the constant drama that had defined his life with Delilah and Aubrey. John sat at his desk at Whole Construction, reviewing the quarterly financial reports. The company was thriving, with 3 major projects underway and 2 more in the bidding phase. His professional life, at least, was exactly as he wanted it. His office phone buzzed. "Mr. Holt, there's a Vanessa Reed here to see you," Rebecca announced. John smiled. Vanessa was the structural engineer his company had recently brought on for the Westlake project. Brilliant, efficient, and refreshingly straightforward. "Send her in, please." Vanessa entered, carrying a stack of blueprints. In her early 40s, she wore her dark hair in a practical bob and dressed in tailored slacks and a crisp blouse, professional without trying to impress. "John, I've reviewed the foundation plans," she said, spreading the blueprints across his desk. "I have some concerns about the southeast corner." For the next hour, they discussed technical details, solutions, and adjustments to the plans. Vanessa was thorough, pointing out potential issues that others might have missed. "I appreciate your attention to detail," John said as they wrapped up. "Most people wouldn't have caught that soil density issue." Vanessa shrugged. "It's my job to find problems before they become expensive mistakes, and you do it well." John gathered the blueprints. "Would you like to continue this discussion over dinner tonight? I'd like to go over the structural modifications in more detail." Vanessa raised an eyebrow. "Is this a business dinner or something else?" John appreciated her directness. "Let's call it a business dinner with potential." She smiled. "Fair enough. Text me the restaurant details." After she left, John turned back to his work, but his phone buzzed with a notification. He glanced at it, a bank alert showing a large attempted withdrawal from his now-empty joint account with Delilah. He opened the banking app and checked the recent attempts. Multiple tries to withdraw cash at various ATMs around town. Multiple declined credit card transactions at stores, restaurants, and gas stations. Delilah was finally discovering the full extent of her new financial reality. If on cue, his personal cell phone rang. The screen showed unknown number, but John had a good idea who it was. He contemplated letting it go to voicemail, but decided it might be entertaining to answer. "John Holt," he said coolly. "John, thank God you answered." Delilah's voice had none of the anger from their last conversation. Now it trembled with panic. "There's something wrong with our accounts." "Is there?" John leaned back in his chair. "Yes. I can't withdraw any money. All the cards are declined. I tried calling the bank, but they said they can't discuss the accounts with me." "What's going on?" "I believe I mentioned this when you called me before. I've moved my assets to secure accounts." "Your assets?" Delilah's voice rose. "That's our money, John. We're still married." "Technically, yes. But as you so bluntly informed me, you've chosen to live with Xavier now. I assume he's providing for you." "John, please." Her tone shifted to pleading. "I need money. Ask Xavier. He has nothing." Delilah's voice cracked. "He lost his job months ago. That's why I was sending him money in the first place. And you didn't think to mention that when you decided to leave me for him." There was a pause. "I made a mistake, okay? Is that what you want to hear?" "I made a terrible mistake." "Yes, you did. Several, in fact." "John, I'm begging you. Just enough for groceries and gas. I'll pay you back. With what money? John almost laughed. You don't work. You have no skills. What exactly do you plan to pay me back with? I'll figure something out. Please, John. I'm desperate. John thought of all the times Delilah had spent thousands on designer clothes while complaining the house needed upgrades. All the time she dismissed his concerns about their spending as him being cheap. All the time she'd gone behind his back to send money to Xavier. Sounds like a you problem, he said finally. What? Delilah sounded genuinely shocked. Your financial situation is no longer my concern. How can you be so cold? After 12 years of marriage, 12 years during which you cheated, lied, and stole from me, John reminded her. 12 years of disrespect and manipulation. So this is revenge. Delilah's voice hardened slightly. You're punishing me? No, Delilah. This is simply the natural consequence of your choices. You chose Xavier over me. You chose to leave. Now you get to experience life without my financial support. I'll go to a lawyer. I'll take half of everything. Feel free to try, though you might have trouble paying the retainer. Delilah let out a frustrated sound that was half sob, half scream. You can't do this to me. I already have. Goodbye, Delilah. John hung up and blocked this new number as well. She would likely find another phone to call from, but he would block those too. Eventually, she would run out of options. His intercom buzzed again. Mr. Holt, your lunch appointment at Morton's is in 30 minutes. Thank you, Rebecca. I'm leaving now. John drove to Morton Steakhouse, one of the most expensive restaurants in town. He rarely indulged in such luxuries, despite his wealth, but today felt like an occasion worth celebrating. The beginning of his new life, free from the parasites who had drained him for years. The maitre d' led him to a private booth near the back. Your usual table, Mr. Holt. Thank you, Thomas. John ordered a glass of water and browsed the menu while waiting for Mike to join him for their weekly lunch meeting. As he studied the wine list, movement near the entrance caught his attention. Aubrey walked in, wearing the black uniform of the restaurant staff, her hair pulled back in a severe ponytail. She looked tired, the confident swagger gone from her step as she approached the maitre d' stand. Thomas spoke to her briefly, then pointed toward John's table. Aubrey turned, her eyes widening as she spotted him. For a moment, she froze, clearly contemplating whether to approach or flee. Professionalism won out. She walked to his table, her face a rigid mask. Good afternoon, sir, she said stiffly. My name is Aubrey, and I'll be your server today. Can I start you with something to drink? John looked up at her, noting the dark circles under her eyes and the chipped nail polish on fingers that had once sported perfect manicures paid for with his money. Water is fine for now, he replied. I'm waiting for a colleague. Aubrey nodded, clearly struggling to maintain her composure. I'll check back when your party is complete. As she turned to leave, John added, Actually, I'm curious. How long have you been working here? Aubrey stopped, her back still to him. 3 days, she said without turning around. And how are you finding it? Now she did turn, her eyes flashing with momentary anger before she forced a server smile. It's a wonderful opportunity. The management is excellent. Glad to hear it. John offered a pleasant smile that didn't reach his eyes. I assume your apartment situation is sorted as well? The 30-day notice I gave you expires next week. Aubrey's smile faltered. I've found arrangements, she said vaguely. Excellent. John returned to his menu. That will be all for now. Aubrey walked away, her shoulders rigid with tension. John watched her go, feeling no satisfaction in her obvious distress. Only the cold certainty that justice was being served. Mike arrived a few minutes later, sliding into the booth across from John. Sorry I'm late. Traffic was a nightmare. No problem. I've been entertained. John nodded toward Aubrey, who was serving another table. Mike followed his gaze, his eyebrows rising. Is that Aubrey? Waiting tables. Indeed it is. Well, I'll be damned. Mike shook his head in disbelief. Never thought I'd see the day. Life has a way of teaching necessary lessons. Aubrey approached their table again, her professional smile firmly in place. Are you gentlemen ready to order? They placed their orders, Aubrey writing everything down without looking at John. When she left, Mike leaned forward. She seems different. Humble. Time will tell, John replied. Actions under duress don't necessarily reflect true change. They turned to business matters, discussing ongoing projects and potential new contracts. Halfway through their meal, John noticed an elegant woman entering the restaurant. Vanessa Reed looked around, spotted him, and approached their table. "John, Mike," she greeted them. "Sorry to interrupt your lunch, but I had a breakthrough on that foundation issue. I thought you'd want to know right away." John gestured to the empty space beside him. "Join us. We're almost finished, and this sounds important." Vanessa slid into the booth and pulled out her tablet, showing them her revised calculations. "If we reinforce this section with additional pilings, we can compensate for the soil density variation without major redesigns." Mike studied the diagrams, impressed. "That could save us weeks of work and thousands in materials. That's why we hired her," John said with genuine appreciation. "Brilliant solution, Vanessa. I'll have the full report to you tomorrow," she promised, tucking the tablet away. "Why don't you stay for lunch?" John offered. "I'd like to discuss this further." "I have time for a quick bite," Vanessa agreed. Aubrey approached with refills for their drinks and stopped short when she saw Vanessa sitting beside John. Her eyes darted between them, a flash of surprise crossing her face. "Can I get you something to drink?" she asked Vanessa, her voice carefully neutral. "Iced tea, please," Vanessa replied. "And we'll need another menu," John added. Aubrey nodded and left, her composure slightly shaken. When she returned with the drink and menu, John made a point of introducing them. "Vanessa, this is Aubrey, my former stepdaughter. Aubrey, this is Vanessa Reed, the new structural engineer for Holt Construction." Vanessa offered a polite smile. "Nice to meet you, Aubrey." "Likewise," Aubrey managed, though her smile was strained. "Are you ready to order?" Vanessa glanced at the menu quickly. "The salmon, please. How's salad on the side?" Aubrey wrote it down and left without further conversation. John watched her retreat to the kitchen, shoulders hunched slightly. "Former stepdaughter?" Vanessa raised an eyebrow. "It's a long story," John replied. "One best saved for another time." They enjoyed their lunch, discussing the project and other topics. John found Vanessa's company refreshing. Her intelligence, professionalism, and straightforward manner a stark contrast to Delilah's manipulative games. When they finished eating, Aubrey brought the check. John handed her his credit card without comment. She returned with the receipt, which he signed, leaving a reasonable but not generous tip. "Thank you for your service today, Aubrey," he said formally. "I wish you luck in your new career." Aubrey's jaw tightened. "Thank you, sir. Have a nice day." As John left the restaurant with Vanessa and Mike, he caught a glimpse of Aubrey watching them from near the kitchen, her expression a mix of anger, envy, and something that might have been regret, but it was too late for regret. Far too late. 2 weeks after the lunch at Morton's, John sat in his home office, reviewing the preliminary divorce paperwork his lawyer had sent over. The document detailed the division of assets, though there was little to divide. John had successfully secured most of his wealth, and Delilah had no legitimate claim to his business. Still, Texas was a community property state, which meant she would be entitled to something. John's lawyer had proposed a settlement offer a lump sum that was generous by legal standards, but a fraction of what Delilah had expected to get from the divorce. His phone buzzed with a text from a number he didn't recognize. "It's Xavier. We need to talk about Delilah." John deleted the message without responding. Whatever troubles Delilah was having with Xavier were not his concern. Another text came through immediately after. "She's been staying on my couch for weeks. I can't take it anymore. She's your problem, not mine." John almost laughed. So Xavier was tired of Delilah already. The great love affair that had been worth destroying a 12-year marriage for was falling apart after less than a month of a third text. "If you don't call me back, I'm dropping her stuff at your house." John blocked this number too and returned to the divorce paperwork. He had no intention of letting Delilah back into his life in any capacity. The doorbell rang an hour later. John checked the security camera and saw a delivery person with a large package. He opened the door. "Delivery for John Holt," the young man said, handing him a clipboard to sign. "I'm not expecting anything," John replied, looking at the large box on his porch. "Address is correct, sir. Just need a signature." John signed, and the delivery person left quickly, John examined the box no return address, but it had been sent through a local courier service. He opened it cautiously and found Delilah's clothes and personal items haphazardly thrown inside. A note on top read, "She's broke and boring. Your problem now." John closed the box and carried it to the garage, setting it next to the trash bins. Then he called his lawyer. "Richard, it's John Holt. I need you to send Delilah a formal notice that any personal property left at my residence will be considered abandoned and disposed of if not collected within 7 days." "Will do, John. Any particular reason?" "Xavier Marks just dumped her belongings on my doorstep. I want to be clear that I'm not accepting responsibility for her or her possessions." "Understood. I'll have the notice delivered today." John hung up and blocked Xavier's number from his phone. The man was as pathetic as Delilah using people until they were no longer useful, then discarding them without a second thought. Later that evening, John's doorbell rang again. This time, the security camera showed Delilah herself standing on his porch, mascara streaking down her face, her once perfect appearance now disheveled and desperate. John didn't answer the door. He watched on the monitor as she rang the bell repeatedly, then began pounding on the door. "John, I know you're in there." Her voice came through clearly on the speaker. "Please just talk to me. Xavier kicked me out. I have nowhere to go." John remained in his office, watching dispassionately as she continued to plead and pound on the door. "All my stuff is here. I saw the box in your garage," she cried. "Just let me get my things. Please, John." After 10 minutes of this, John picked up his phone and called the police non-emergency line. "I'd like to report a disturbance at my residence," he said calmly, giving them his address. "My soon-to-be ex-wife is causing a scene on my property. I've asked her to leave, but she's refusing." Within 15 minutes, a police cruiser pulled up. 2 officers approached Delilah, who immediately switched from hysterical to indignant. "This is my house, too." John heard her tell the officers through the security system. "My name is Delilah Holt. I live here." One of the officers checked his notes. "Ma'am, according to our records, you don't reside at this address. Mr. Holt has requested that you leave the property. But my things are here. He has my clothes, my jewelry, You'll need to resolve that through proper legal channels, ma'am. Right now, you need to leave the premises. Can I at least talk to him?" "John." She turned back to the door, shouting, "John, please. Just 5 minutes." The officers were firm but polite. "Ma'am, if you don't leave voluntarily, we'll have to escort you off the property." Delilah finally gave up, allowing the officers to guide her back to the street. John watched as they spoke to her briefly before she trudged away. Shoulders slumped in defeat, one of the officers rang the doorbell. John went downstairs and opened it. "Mr. Holt?" "Officer Daniels. We've escorted the woman off your property." "Thank you, officer. I appreciate your assistance. She claims to be your wife and that she lives here." "She is my wife, technically," John acknowledged. "But we're in the process of divorcing, and she hasn't lived here for several weeks. She left voluntarily to move in with another man." The officer nodded. "That matches what dispatch told us. You might want to get a restraining order if this continues." "I'll consider that. Thank you again." After the police left, John went back to his office. His phone had multiple missed calls and texts from Delilah, using yet another new number. "Please, John, I'm begging you. I have nowhere to go. I made a terrible mistake. I'll do anything." John blocked this number too and turned back to his work. Delilah had made her choice. She had left him for Xavier, insulted him, stolen from him, betrayed him in every possible way. Now she was facing the consequences. Later that night, as John was preparing for bed, his phone buzzed with a text from an unfamiliar number. He almost blocked it automatically, assuming it was Delilah again, but glanced at the message first. "Dad, it's Aubrey. I know you probably don't want to hear from me, but I need to talk to you about Mom." John hesitated, then read the second text that followed. "She called me crying. Xavier kicked her out and called her broke and boring. She has nowhere to go. I can't help her. I can barely support myself." A third message appeared. "I'm not asking you to take her back. I know she messed up. We both did. But she's really desperate." John typed a reply. "What do you expect me to do about that?" Aubrey responded immediately. "Nothing. I just thought you should know. She's talking about living in her car. The car I paid for. John replied, the one registered in my name that I'll be reclaiming next week. There was a long pause before Aubrey's next text. I get it. You hate us. You've made your point. I don't hate you, Aubrey. I'm indifferent to you. There's a difference. How can you be so cold? She's still your wife. Not for much longer. The divorce will be final soon. Another pause, then. I'm sorry, okay? For everything I said and did. I was spoiled and entitled and horrible. But Mom is seriously in trouble. She has no money, no job skills, no place to live. That's unfortunate, John replied. But it's not my problem anymore. So you're just going to let her end up on the street. Delilah has options. She has family in Houston. She has friends who haven't seen the recording yet. She could get a job like you did. A waitressing job won't pay for an apartment. And she burned bridges with her family years ago. Again, not my problem. Aubrey's final text came after several minutes. I used to think you were the best dad in the world. Now I don't even know who you are. John didn't bother responding to that. Aubrey had never seen him as a father, only as a provider, an ATM, as she had so bluntly put it. Her opinion of him meant nothing. He turned off his phone and went to bed, sleeping soundly for the first time in years. The next morning, he checked his email and found a message from Delilah sent at 3:17 a.m. John, I know you won't answer my calls or texts. I don't blame you. What I did was unforgivable. I threw away 12 years with a good man for a fantasy that turned out to be a nightmare. Xavier used me just like I used you. Karma, I guess that I'm staying in a motel tonight, but I only have enough money for one night. After that, I don't know what I'll do. I've called everyone we know, but no one will help me after they heard that recording that I'm not asking you to take me back. I know that's impossible after what I did. But if you could just help me get on my feet, give me a small settlement so I can find a place to live and figure out what to do next, I would be eternally grateful that I miss you. Can we talk? John read the email twice, noting the calculated manipulation in every line. The admission of wrongdoing, the appeal to his better nature, the implied threat of homelessness, and finally, the suggestion that she missed him, all designed to make him feel guilty and responsible for her welfare. Without a moment's hesitation, he deleted the message and emptied his trash folder. Delilah had made her bed. Now she could lie in at point 3 months later. John sat at his usual table at Morton's, reviewing construction plans while waiting for Vanessa to join him for lunch. Their professional relationship had evolved into something more personal over the past few months, though both were proceeding cautiously. Vanessa was different from any woman he'd known, intelligent, independent, secure in herself. She had her own career, her own money, her own life. She wanted John's company, not his resources or status. The contrast with Delilah was stark and refreshing. Would you like another water, Mr. Holt? Aubrey asked, approaching his table with a pitcher. Yes, thank you, John replied without looking up from his papers. Aubrey refilled his glass silently. In the 3 months since she'd started working at Morton's, their interactions had been strictly professional. She had learned quickly that attempting to engage him in personal conversation was pointless. John glanced up as she finished pouring. Aubrey looked tired, the circles under her eyes darker than before. Her once manicured nails were short and plain, her hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. The entitled princess was gone, replaced by a young woman struggling to support herself. How are your studies going? John asked, surprising both of them with the question. Aubrey hesitated. I had to drop to part-time, working double shifts most days. John nodded, neither sympathetic nor dismissive. Education is important. I know that now. Aubrey shifted uncomfortably. The financial aid office helped me get some loans and a small scholarship. It's not enough, but it's something. I see. Aubrey looked like she wanted to say more, but stopped herself. Will your guest be joining you soon? Yes, she just texted. She's parking now. I'll bring another water when she arrives. Aubrey turned to leave, then paused. I saw Mom yesterday. John looked up sharply. Did you? She's staying at a women's shelter downtown. Got a job at a convenience store. Aubrey's voice was flat, stating facts without emotion. She asked about you. What did you tell her? That you're doing well. That you're seeing someone new. Aubrey met his eyes briefly. She cried. That's unfortunate. John replied evenly. Yeah. Aubrey nodded slightly. Anyway, I'll check back when your guest arrives. As she walked away, John saw Vanessa entering the restaurant. She spotted him and approached, elegant in a burgundy dress that complemented her dark hair. "Sorry I'm late," she said, sliding into the booth across from him. "The city permit office is a nightmare." "No problem. I was getting some work done." John put away his papers. "You look lovely." "Thank you." Vanessa smiled. "Good news, I got the permits approved for the Westlake project. We can break ground next week." "That is good news. Eleanor will be pleased." They discussed business briefly until Aubrey returned with water for Vanessa and took their orders. Once she left, Vanessa raised an eyebrow. "That's your stepdaughter, right?" "The one who works here." "Former stepdaughter," John corrected. "But yes, she seems different from what you described. Subdued." Reality has a way of adjusting expectations. Vanessa studied him thoughtfully. "She mentioned seeing your ex-wife." For a moment, their eyes met across the distance. Aubrey's face showed a complex mix of emotions: envy, resentment, resignation, and perhaps a touch of understanding. She had made her choices just as Delilah had. They had treated him as nothing more than a resource to be exploited. They had mocked him, betrayed him, disrespected him at every turn. Now they were sleeping in the bed they had made. A hard, uncomfortable bed with no one to blame but themselves. John turned away without acknowledgement and opened Vanessa's car door for her. As he walked to his own vehicle, he felt no guilt, no remorse, no second thoughts. Only the satisfaction of justice served and a new life beginning. Delilah and Aubrey were no longer his concern. They were simply characters in a story he had finished reading, a book he had closed for good. John started his car and drove toward his office, leaving the past firmly behind him.